everyone, welcome once again to another episode of Let's Get Soroban. For today's episode, we're talking about authentication. What's authentication? Authentication is being used to verify that a specific address has authorized the transaction. It shows an error if authentication fails. There are two ways of carrying out authentication in Soroban smart contracts. One way is using the require auth or use the require auth for acts. Just as the name signifies, auth for acts, meaning that you pass in one or two arguments together with this, but when you're using this one, you don't need to pass in any arguments. So, talking about the require auth. The require auth is a function in Soroban smart contract that ensures that the caller or the address reference has the authority to perform certain operations, just as I explained before. The same thing. But the require auth for acts is very useful when all certain parameters are needed for verification. Maybe, for example, the parameter of maybe a value or an address, metadata, a lot of things is needed. Then you have to use the require auth for acts, meaning that there are a lot of arguments attached to that function. So authentication is very similar to signature verification in other blockchain. In a situation whereby we have a user trying to interact with a decentralized application, the function that's being interacted with requires that user to sign a transaction. On normal day, it pops up a mode that requires the user to sign that transaction. When the user signs that transaction, it leads to a successful transaction. But when the user doesn't sign that transaction, the transaction doesn't go through. This is what Soroban is trying to solve. So in terms of testing, or you're interacting with your Soroban, in terms of testing, especially, you use the mock auth to interact with your smart contract, making sure that okay, this is working fine. The mock auth or the mock all auth is being used if you're using the require auth function. You make sure you use the mock auth or the mock all auth. The mock auth is a testing utility that checks for authentication for a specific address, whereby the mock auth is the same thing though, but it's being used in situation whereby you requires a multiple authentication. So that's when mock all auth is being used. So I'm going to show you later on how you need to use this. So or you can also use the mock auth for arguments if you're using the require auth for acts. So if you're using the require auth, you use just the you're using this mock auth or you're using the mock all auth. But if you're using the require auth for acts, you're going to use the mock all auth for acts mock auth or acts function for your testing. So this is being used, like I said, is being used with specific arguments. So why exactly do you need authentication in your contract? You need authentication to prevent unauthorized access to a user's assets and data. And you also need it because anyone can come in and impersonate any user and steal their assets. So with you requiring that okay, a user has to sign this transaction, or imagine we are writing a function whereby you're transferring a token from certain address to another address. You're going to use the require auth for that from address, making sure that the from address that the money be transferred from has to authorize that transaction before the transaction can be carried out. So nobody can come in and hack into another person's perform a transaction without someone authorizing it. So by using this authentication in Soroban smart contract, you are enabling that the user has to authorize this transaction before the transaction can be carried out. So this is why it's very needed in your contract. So moving forward, this is the contract of the building from scratch. Last thing we implemented was the events. Yes, this is the event we implemented. If this is the first time, I advise you to go back and watch a previous video about events and know how to work on it. So for today, like I said, we're talking about the authentication. So for doing that, first of all, we are going to use require auth. And for using require auth, we have to pass in an address parameter. So this is an address. So we have to say user this user dot require auth. If we want to use require auth for args, it's just going to be maybe user, and maybe they're going to be a value of let's say u32. Okay, meaning that we're going to pass in a reference here. Then it's going to be value, and it's going to be require auth for args. But since we're not doing this, it's just going to be require auth. Let's move this, and this also require auth, meaning just the address. So these are two ways of using the require auth or using the require auth for args, depends on your use case. So this is it. And moving forward, I'm going to show you guys how to test this authentication. So let's go forward, self text, and for that, I didn't mention initial data. We need to, in our contract, we need to import the address. So for me to be able to use the address, I had to import this address from the SDK, meaning that it's been imported in here to be used in here as an address for the user. So in our tests, what does we need to do now was to come here and import the address in our test units. So I'm importing it, tap to import it here, and then we also need to generate an address for each user. The user, let user 1 plus address generate address env passing, and also need to set the mock-up. I mentioned earlier that if we're going to carry out multiple authentication, the best thing to do is just use mock all auths. But if it's going to be just maybe once authentication, maybe a calling authentication just one time, we can use just mock auths. But since you can see that we're going to call authentication multiple times in here, we're going to use mock auth, and then this user 1 will be referenced in here, pass in here as a reference, pass in here as a reference as well, because from our contract you can see that it only has one parameter of address. This actually is a constant. Whenever you're working in a Soroban smart contract, it's very you always use the environment variable for it, and this is actually a constant. It's not a parameter. So passing in the address in here is just going to be okay, pass the reference to the address, meaning that when this contract is being called with reference to this address. So this address is being generated, and this is the address that's going to be used for authentication. So that's how it works. So with this I've explained to you, I hope you're able to understand what authentication is, has been used in your contract in here, and also has been used in your tests. You're either using mock auth or maybe using mock all auth, and it's very important for security purposes as well. So if you want to read more about authentication, I'm going to attach a document where you can read about it and the different way of testing it. So this is one way of testing using your using authentication.